Flintlock pistols. Flintlock pistols in the 1600s formed a broad family rather than a single model, with the true flintlock coalescing in France around the early 17th century and spreading across Europe by mid-century. Period and collector usage divided them by size and purpose: pocket or coat pistols, belt pistols often fitted with hooks, coach pistols, and larger horse pistols rather than by rigid pattern. Regional adoption reflected national priorities. Dutch forces shifted from snaphances toward true flintlocks by the 1640s, while other states converted more gradually from matchlocks and wheel locks as logistics allowed. The ignition relied on flint striking steel to shower sparks into a priming pan. Compared with matchlocks, the system reduced misfires and removed the hazard of a burning match near powder stores. Though moisture still challenged reliability at sea, leather lock covers and careful priming mitigated but did not eliminate damp-related failures. Aboard ship, the pistol's role was straightforward: a one-handed shot to break a rush or initiate boarding, then a transition to edged weapons. Compact patterns suited officers and working sailors navigating tight spaces below decks. These pistols were smooth-bore, with barrel lengths ranging from pocket size to long horse pistol dimensions. Brass furniture trigger guards, butt caps, side plates grew common where corrosion resistance mattered. Loads were round lead ball over black powder. Military users favored paper cartridges for speed. Effective range remained short, and the practical answer was to carry multiple pistols rather than reload in the press of a fight. Period descriptions and imagery place pistols alongside cutlasses in boarding doctrine, while their ubiquity in naval and merchant settings explains how pirates acquired them through purchase, capture, or prize distributions. Breech-loading Queen Anne pistols, arriving late in the century, show how pistol-length barrels made unscrewed breech loading practical, even if the feature remained a niche. The Flint era's handling practices and drill-shaped later dueling pistols and lingered into the percussion period, carrying forward the idea of compact, single-purpose sidearms for close-quarters work. Blunderbuss pistols. The blunderbuss originated in the Netherlands in the early 17th century. Its name derived from donderbus, or thunder gun, and quickly spread through European workshops. The compact, handgun-sized variant known as the Dragon served the same idea as the longer shoulder-fired type, but optimized it for cramped spaces aboard ship. Wheelock and snap-haunce examples appear early, yet flintlock systems soon dominated due to simpler maintenance at sea. The flared muzzle, often brass, eased loading and produced an intimidating profile. In close-quarters fighting ladders, hatches, and gangways, the Dragon offered a single, violent discharge that swept a narrow space and unsettled opponents. Officers and boarding parties favored it because it remained one-handed, leaving the other hand free for a blade or for balance on rolling decks. Construction typically involved short barrels around 10–16 inches, with brass or bronze chosen where salt air ruined iron. Loads included multiple small balls, buckshot, or whatever scrap was available in an emergency. The weapon's effective range was measured in paces rather than yards, and crews again relied on carrying several pieces rather than attempting to reload under pressure. Period illustrations, museum specimens, and contemporary accounts place blunderbusses in naval stores, privateer outfits, and captured cargoes, which put them into pirate circulation almost by default. The type later lost ground to more compact pistols and carbines, but the idea of short-range area denial fire influenced later maritime arms and the broader evolution of close-quarters long guns. Holster pistols. Large holster or horse pistols adapted naturally to sea duty, where reloading a single-shot pistol in the midst of a boarding action proved impractical. Pirates, privateers, and naval boarding parties solved the problem by carrying pistols in a brace pairs or more slung on belts, sashes, or bandoliers. Period accounts describe multiple loaded pistols worn across the chest, a practice that traded weight for immediate firepower. These pistols descended from 16th-century Reiter sidearms and evolved toward more standardized 18th-century sea service lines. Flintlock ignition predominated by the later 1600s, though doglocks persisted in earlier decades, especially on workmanlike pistols intended for rough handling. Belt hooks allowed quick access while climbing rigging or crossing from ship to ship. Typical barrels ranged from 8 to 12 inches, often in .65 to .71 caliber, to align with service musket ball sizes. In practice, the doctrine was to fire once at close range and discard the weapon for another. Museum holdings, engravings, and wreck recoveries link these holster pistols to sea service, and the volume produced for national navies explains why so many ended up in private hands, black markets, and pirate arsenals. The heavy brass butt cap did more than anchor the balance. It served as a convenient pommel when the pistol was empty. Doglock pistols. The doglock, often called the English lock, bridged the gap between snap-haunts and the later flintlock by providing a positive external safety. The dog, an external catch, held the cock off the pan at a safe position. When the lock was brought to full cock, the mechanism pushed the dog clear for firing. This arrangement kept the pan covered and the flint ready without relying on the internal half-cock notch that defined later flintlocks. Emerging in the late 16th century and used widely through the later 1600s, the doglock appealed to military users operating in crowded conditions where accidental discharge carried real risk. At sea, the clear-cut safety procedure and robust ignition made the system practical. British and Dutch adoption gave the type broad distribution, and colonial finds in Atlantic ports show its presence in the same networks that equipped privateers and raiders. Ammunition remained the familiar round ball and powder, with very short effective ranges that pushed combatants to carry several pistols rather than attempt a reload on a moving deck. Surviving examples in collections, along with period practice notes, anchor the doglock in the transitional story of 17th century ignition systems, as true flintlocks absorbed safe carry functions internally. The visible dog appeared redundant and old-fashioned. Snap-haunts. Snap-haunts mechanisms spelled in several ways across languages represent early flint ignition, with an automatic pan cover separate from the steel. They emerged in the late 16th century as an improvement over snaplocks by shielding priming powder until the instant of firing. The design spread across Europe and into North Africa and the Middle East, with national and regional schools developing distinct geometries. Mechanically, the cock clamped a flint that struck a hard steel, throwing sparks into the pan as the cover snapped open. The advantage at sea was straightforward, no burning match to manage, better moisture protection than snaplocks, and a spark path that tolerated wind better than exposed priming. In maritime contexts, these pistols saw use with officers, cavalry operating near ports, and colonial markets whose needs were often supplied by whatever pattern was available. The Atlantic trade shows them early and often, and legal bans in some New England colonies late in the century indicate both their popularity and the desire to standardize away from older forms. Nevertheless, the snap-haunts' automatic pan cover and spark management form a clear evolutionary step toward the flintlocks that defined 18th century naval pistols. Miquelet pistols. Miquelet is a modern umbrella term for several related Mediterranean flint systems whose period names varied: patilla in Spain, Roman lock in Italy, and regional forms across the Ottoman world and North Africa. The lock's defining traits include horizontal sears, acting through the lock plate, an external mainspring on many variants, and a combined battery and pan cover. Sources place flint against steel solutions in wide use after match, and wheel mechanisms proved unreliable in wind and rain during maritime campaigns. The Miquelet's integrated pan cover and authoritative spark production answered those problems in a Mediterranean climate. Pistols of this family appear across Spain, Portugal, Italy, the Balkans, and Ottoman domains. Booty, trade, and mercenary service carried them between fleets and into corsair arsenals. On board, the pistols performed the same roles as northern flintlocks: a compact, one-handed firearm for boarding, defense, and coercion at close range. Construction often showcased regional aesthetics: striated battery faces on Spanish work, decorative bridges tying the cockscrew to the frizzen screw on Ottoman pieces, and inlays that marked high-status ownership. The ammunition mirrored European practice with round ball and black powder, with range and reload times that argued for carrying several pistols at once. The family's later obscurity owes much to terminology. 19th century labels and modern collector categories blur distinctions among Spanish, Italian, and Ottoman subtypes, and the rise of the French pattern flintlock in northern navies shifted English-language attention away from Mediterranean solutions that nonetheless persisted well into the percussion era. Turnover, double-barrel pistols. Turnover pistols, often called wenders from the German for to turn, solved the reloading problem by giving the user 2 shots from a single lock. The design placed 2 barrels on a rotating assembly, each with its own priming pan. After firing the first, the shooter rotated the barrel unit 180 degrees to bring the second pan and bore into line with the lock. The ignition was a conventional flintlock, but the twin pans and rotating breech offered immediate redundancy without doubling the complexity of 2 separate locks. At sea, where a misfire or a single empty pistol could make the difference in a brief melee, 2 shots in one tool appealed to officers, wealthy captains, and privateers willing to pay for fine work. The concept anticipated later revolving firearms by aligning multiple charges to a single lock and trigger. Calibers in the neighborhood of .50 were common for contemporary pistols, with smoothbore barrels and performance optimized for a few yards rather than long-range precision. The user still primed, loaded, and maintained the pistol like any flintlock. The advantage lay entirely in halving the frequency of reloads, because these arms were expensive and produced in limited numbers by master shops. They remain rare, and their identity is sometimes obscured by mislabeling as later dueling pieces. Duckfoot multi-barrel pistols. Volley pistols gathered several short barrels on a single frame to discharge simultaneously. The 4-barrel duckfoot, named for its splayed muzzle profile, became the most recognizable form, though 3-barrel and larger arrangements exist. The design solved a specific problem in a cramped corridor, boat, or below-decks compartment. A single pull of the trigger that sent multiple balls downrange offered both psychological shock and practical crowd dispersal effect. Mechanically, most were flintlock box locks with an interconnected priming path. Moisture still threatened open pans, but brass furniture and regular care reduced corrosion. The barrels were short and large bore, often in the .45–.52 range, and sometimes rifled despite the intended distances being only a few yards. Loading meant charging each bore individually and ensuring the priming path reached all vents. So users again tended to carry a spare rather than attempt a reload under pressure. Naval captains, prison wardens, and guards appear in period references with these pistols, and British and continental examples populate museum holdings. The devices appear in lists of shipboard arms as defensive tools against mutiny or boarding, a role that fits their geometry and firing concept. A handful of examples employed unusual features, such as downward canted barrels to cover multiple elevations or barbed butt fittings for post-shot grappling. As percussion systems and then true repeating pistols matured, volley pistols faded. Their specialized role, heavy frames, and slow loading kept them on the fringes even in their own time. They remain visually striking artifacts of the search for more immediate firepower before cartridges and cylinders solved the problem more elegantly. Sea service pistols. Before 18th century standardization, sea service pistols were workshop products adapted from cavalry patterns for maritime use. England, France, and the Dutch Republic produced large numbers, while Italian and Spanish makers supplied Mediterranean markets. Many combined longish pistol barrels with brass furniture and, crucially, a belt hook that let sailors secure the pistol without a holster while climbing and fighting. Doglocks appear on mid-century examples, with mature flintlocks taking over late in the 1600s and into the early 1700s. The rationale at sea remained the same: dependable ignition without open flame, and locks that could be reprimed quickly if a pan became wet or fouled. Brass butt caps, side plates, and sometimes barrels earned their keep against salt air. Stocks were hardwood, oiled to resist humidity, and the overall fit emphasized durability over decoration, except for officers' pieces. Calibers clustered around service musket sizes, with barrel lengths of roughly 12–14 inches. The pistols were meant for point-blank work, and the loading cycle powder, balls of prime, argued against pausing to recharge during a melee. Archaeology from famous wrecks has yielded pistol parts consistent with sea service types, while museum collections and period imagery anchor these features in naval practice. Written accounts note brass-mounted pistols among captured arms, which aligns with their wide distribution through trade and prize. The adoption of formal patterns in the early 18th century codified dimensions and fittings already familiar on 17th century pieces. That later standardization tends to overshadow the earlier, less uniform pistols in modern references, even though the older forms established the functional vocabulary: belt hooks, corrosion-resistant fittings, large bores that defined naval sidearms for generations. Wheellock pistols. Wheellock pistols predate widespread flintlock use and show up at the start of the century as elite sidearms. The lock used a spring-driven, serrated steel wheel that spun against iron pyrite held in a dog, throwing sparks into a covered pan that opened at the moment of firing. The design was mechanically sophisticated, expensive, and relatively resistant to wind and rain compared to matchlocks, which made it attractive for officers and mounted troops operating in difficult weather. At sea, the advantages were similar: no smoldering match near powder kegs, and an enclosed priming system that kept moisture at bay until the last instant. The drawbacks were equally clear. A wheellock requires a spanner to wind the mainspring. The lock is sensitive to neglect, and the mechanism demands skilled maintenance. As flintlocks matured, many users preferred their lower cost and simpler upkeep. Wheellock pistols include several recognizable forms: ball-butt grips favored in German schools, long one-handable types, and sheet metal stock experiments. Calibers comparable to later flint pistols were common, with smooth-bore barrels and effective ranges that reflected early pistol doctrine rather than precision fire. Like their successors, users often carried multiple pistols to avoid reloading under stress. Surviving concentrations in European arsenals and museums show both the scale of historical production and the care that elite patrons invested in decoration. The type's maritime footprint is less explicit than later flintlocks, though the mechanical logic holds for early 17th century service on wet, windy decks. Its decline is easy to read. Flintlocks delivered near equal practical performance at lower cost and with fewer parts. And once internal half-cock safeties were established, the everyday case for the wheel faded. Even so, the wheellock's self-igniting principle and covered pan helped pave the way for later locks that codified those ideas into simpler, more durable packages. And that's all for this video. If you liked it, a quick thumbs up and share with fellow firearm nerds would help a ton. Got ideas for future topics? Drop them in the comments, we're all ears. Thanks for watching.